A 9-year-old boy sat rigid in the clinic's waiting room. His eyes didn't move. His hands gripped his shirt. Beside him, a man stared straight ahead. In less than an hour, an X-ray would force Dr. Alejandro Ramos to call 911. Before continuing this amazing story, let us know where we are watching from today. Let's begin our story. Pueblo del Sol Community Clinic, 9 p.m. Desert heat still clung to the walls. The vents pushed warm air that smelled faintly of dust. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, one flickering every few seconds. The waiting room was nearly empty. Only one pair of seats was occupied. A man. A boy. Silent. From the street outside came the faint rush of trucks on the highway. The building felt too still, too quiet. Why were they the only ones here so late? Dr. Alejandro Ramos rubbed the bridge of his nose. A stack of charts sat on his desk, half-finished. His eyes were tired, but his hands still moved quick over the pages. Nurse Rosa Cortez locked the supply cabinet. She was efficient, but her gaze drifted to the waiting room. Her voice dropped. "You see them?" Alejandro looked up. The man in the corner clutched a folded newspaper. The boy sat stiff beside him. Alejandro watched the man's hand rest on the boy's shoulder. The boy flinched, quick, almost invisible. Why would a child recoil from his own father's touch? The man's name, he said, was Esteban Cruz. His voice was flat, his answer short. The boy was Mateo, 9 years old. Mateo's clothes hung loose on his small frame. His skin looked pale under the harsh lights. He kept his head down, eyes fixed on the floor. Rosa offered them water. Esteban shook his head. "We're fine." His fingers tightened on the newspaper. She leaned toward Alejandro. "No ID. And the kid's in pain." Mateo's arms curled around his stomach. Every movement looked careful, guarded. What was he hiding under those folded arms? Alejandro called them in. Esteban guided Mateo with a firm grip on the shoulder. The boy didn't resist. He just moved, like every step hurt. Inside the exam room, Alejandro tried to keep his tone calm. "Mateo, I'm just gonna check a few things, all right?" Mateo nodded, without looking up. His voice was barely a whisper. "Okay." Rosa clipped the pulse oximeter to his finger. The reading flashed, oxygen a little low. Blood pressure, higher than it should be for a child his size. Alejandro lifted the stethoscope. Heart fast, breath shallow, uneven. When his hand pressed lightly against the abdomen, Mateo winced. Alejandro paused. He tried another spot, hard as wood. The boy's small hands clamped tighter around his middle. "Does it hurt here?" Mateo just gave the smallest nod. Alejandro straightened. "I need an X-ray." Esteban's head snapped up. "That's not necessary. He just needs rest." His tone sharpened. Alejandro held his gaze. "I need to know what's in there." The man's jaw worked. His hand flexed over the newspaper. Alejandro didn't blink. Esteban's stare was the kind men use to make others back down. But Alejandro had seen too many injuries, too many lies. He didn't flinch. Finally, Esteban let out a slow breath. "Fine, but make it quick." The way he said it wasn't permission. It was a warning. Rosa stood ready by the door. "Radiology's free." Her voice was light, but Alejandro noticed the way she kept herself between the man and the hallway. They walked together, the three of them, down the narrow corridor. The clinic's nighttime silence made every step louder. Mateo's sneakers squeaked once, then stayed silent. Esteban stayed close, a hand on the boy's shoulder. His grip looked casual, but his fingers were pressed into the fabric, a hold you couldn't easily break. Alejandro pushed the door open to the radiology room. Inside, the air was cooler. The hum of the machine filled the space like a low growl. Marco, the radiology tech, looked up from his clipboard. He was short, quick-moving, with a friendly face. You, the last one tonight? He asked, glancing between Mateo and Esteban. Yeah, Alejandro said. We need abdominal films. Full set. Marco nodded, powering up the console. The overhead light buzzed, then went still. Rosa knelt to Mateo's level. It's just a picture, she said softly. You'll stand here, hold still, and it's over. Mateo gave her the smallest nod. Esteban didn't speak. He just stepped back into the corner, leaning against the wall, eyes sharp. Marco adjusted the machine height. Alejandro watched Mateo step forward. The boy's shirt hung loose, but when he reached up to lift it, his fingers trembled. Arms up, Marco instructed. Stay very still. The machine whirred to life. As the plates moved into position, Alejandro noticed something. Mateo's lips moved, just barely. He stepped closer. What did you say, Mateo? The boy's voice was so low it almost vanished under the machine's hum. Please, don't take me. Alejandro's chest tightened. What do you mean? But the machine gave its loud click, that moment of metallic certainty, and Mateo went silent. Marco looked at Alejandro, eyebrows raised. Alejandro shook his head, letting it go for the moment. They needed the image. The first scan processed on the monitor. Alejandro leaned in, Marco beside him. The gray shapes took form. And then, there it was. Dozens of uniform. Oval shadows filled the boy's gut. Each one smooth. Each one exactly the same size. He knew that pattern. Everyone in border medicine did. Body packing. But one of the shadows wasn't smooth. Its edge looked jagged. There was a faint halo around it. The telltale sign of leakage. In that instant, Alejandro's pulse kicked up. A leaking pellet meant poison spilling into the child's body. It meant hours, maybe minutes, before it turned fatal. Marco caught the look on Alejandro's face. That's, not food, is it? No, Alejandro said. His voice was low, but hard. It's narcotics. Wrapped. One's rupturing. Marco swore under his breath. Call 911? Alejandro didn't hesitate. Now. Rosa, hearing them from the doorway, already had her phone out. She turned into the hall, speaking in clipped, urgent Spanish to emergency dispatch. Esteban noticed. His gaze snapped from Rosa to Alejandro. What are you doing? Alejandro kept his voice even. Your son needs emergency surgery, right now. He's fine, Esteban said, stepping forward. You're making a mistake. Alejandro took a half step between him and Mateo. He has a ruptured pellet inside him. If we don't act, I said he's fine. Esteban's tone sharpened into something dangerous. His hand clenched the folded newspaper until the paper crinkled. From the hallway, Rosa's voice carried. See, a child, drug mules. Possible rupture. Esteban's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to the door. Then to the boy. Then back to Alejandro. The muscles in Alejandro's neck tightened. He'd seen this moment before, the split second where a man decides to run. And when they run, they don't leave the patient behind. He spoke quickly, quietly. Esteban, listen to me, he'll die. But Esteban didn't listen. He moved, fast. In one motion, he yanked Mateo toward him, the boy's body jerking with a sudden force. Mateo gasped. Hey, Alejandro started, stepping forward. But Esteban shoved the X-ray table back, creating space. Rosa came back into the doorway, phone still at her ear. Her eyes widened. Alejandro. Esteban pulled Mateo toward the hall. The boy's sneakers scraped across the floor. Alejandro's voice rose. Stop. He won't survive a rupture. Esteban didn't stop. He didn't look back. Esteban's stride was long, urgent. Mateo stumbled to keep up. The man didn't slow. Alejandro followed. Fast. Esteban, listen to me. That pellet is leaking. His voice echoed in the empty corridor. Rosa was right behind him, still clutching the phone. Her voice to the dispatcher grew sharper. "They're leaving. He's taking the boy. Send units now." Esteban reached the side door. It banged open, desert night spilling in, hot, dry air rushing past them. The smell of asphalt and dust hit Alejandro's nose. He grabbed the doorframe and lunged forward. Esteban shoved Mateo into the night, his own body blocking Alejandro's reach. The parking lot was dimly lit. A single yellow street lamp buzzed overhead. The shadows from the clinic stretched long and jagged across the cracked pavement. Esteban yanked the boy toward a dark sedan idling at the far edge. The engine was already running. "Stop!" Alejandro's voice cracked. "He's going to die before you get anywhere." Esteban didn't look back. His hand gripped Mateo's wrist like a vice. Alejandro sprinted after them. His shoes slapped against the pavement, the sound hollow in the night air. He could hear Rosa behind him calling, "Police are on the way!" They were halfway to the car when Mateo stumbled again. His knees hit the pavement with a dull scrape. He cried out, clutching his stomach. Alejandro's chest tightened. The boy's pain was real, worsening. But Esteban bent, hauled him up without slowing. "Don't make this harder," Esteban growled, not to Alejandro, but to the boy. The sedan's rear door swung open. A driver leaned across the seat, glancing at Alejandro with cold, assessing eyes. Alejandro pushed harder, closing the distance. If he could just grab the boy. Esteban saw him coming. He twisted, using his own body as a shield. In one sharp motion, he shoved Mateo into the car's back seat. The driver's hand hit the gear shift. Tires squealed. The car jerked forward. Alejandro reached out. His fingers brushed the boy's sleeve. But the sedan surged away, the sound of the engine drowning the boy's small, panicked gasp. Rosa caught up, breathless. "They're gone! Plate!" Alejandro shook his head. The rear plate was coated in mud. No numbers, no letters. The street lamp buzzed overhead. The only sound left was the faint hiss of the cooling engine from a parked clinic van nearby. Alejandro stood frozen for a moment, chest heaving. In his mind, he saw the X-ray again. The ruptured pellet, the shadows, filling the child's small frame. Rosa's voice pulled him back. "What do we tell the police?" Alejandro's jaw set. "We tell them exactly what's inside that boy, and that he's running out of time." Could the police find a moving car in the desert night, before the leaking poison inside Mateo killed him? Alejandro stood in the empty parking lot, chest still pounding from the sprint. The taillights had vanished seconds ago, swallowed by the dark highway. Rosa pressed the phone to her ear. See. Male. Mid-30s. Child. 9 years. Small. Underweight. Her Spanish was clipped, urgent. They're in a dark sedan, plates covered, heading east. Alejandro forced himself to breathe evenly, but his thoughts raced faster than his pulse. Every minute that boy was out there, the ruptured pellet leaked more poison into his bloodstream. It wasn't just dangerous. It was a countdown. The crunch of tires on gravel drew his attention. A black and white sheriff's cruiser swung into the lot, headlights sweeping across the cracked pavement. 2 deputies stepped out, one older, broad-shouldered, the other young and wiry, still adjusting his belt. The older one spoke first. "We got the call. Tell me exactly what happened." Alejandro didn't waste words. "Boy named Mateo Cruz, 9 years old. Brought in by a man claiming to be his father, Esteban Cruz. We did an X-ray. He's a body packer, dozens of pellets, one is leaking." The younger deputy frowned. "Pellets?" Alejandro's voice hardened. "Drugs. Wrapped inside him. The rupture will kill him tonight." The older deputy lifted his chin. "All right. We'll get the description out, but with plates covered and a head start." He trailed off, giving the kind of look that meant don't expect too much. "That's not good enough," Alejandro snapped. "He's a child." The deputy sighed. "Doctor, I understand. But out here, there are a dozen side roads and old service tracks they could take. They'll ditch the car if they "No, we're looking." Rosa stepped in, voice tight. "Then you better move fast. He doesn't have hours." The older deputy glanced at her, then at Alejandro. "We'll radio the county and the highway patrol. But you should know, cases like this, they get messy, especially if the cartel's involved." Alejandro's mind snagged on the word, cartel. Of course. That explained the man's cold composure, the covered plates, the urgency to leave. "Messy or not," Alejandro said, his tone sharp enough to cut, "I am not letting that boy die because paperwork takes too long." The older deputy studied him for a beat, then nodded once to his partner. The younger one keyed his radio, voice quick. "Be on the lookout. Dark sedan eastbound from Pueblo del Sol. Possible narcotics mule, juvenile passenger." Alejandro turned back toward the clinic. He needed something. Anything. The image. He walked fast, the deputies following him inside. In radiology, Marco still stood by the monitor, the X-ray frozen on the screen. Even in grayscale, the truth was unmistakable. A small frame, filled with the perfect ovals of contraband. And one darkened smear where the rupture spread. Alejandro pointed. "Print it." Marco glanced at the deputies, then back to Alejandro. "You want this in their hands?" "Yes," Alejandro said. "If they stop any car even close to that description, they need to know what's at stake." The printer hummed to life, spitting out the image on glossy film. Alejandro handed it to the older deputy. "This isn't a criminal to me. This is a patient in acute crisis. If he doesn't get surgery, you'll be hauling a body, not making an arrest." The deputy's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. "I'll get this circulated." He slid it into a document pouch, clipped it to his vest. As they left, Rosa lingered by the doorway. "You think they'll find him?" she asked quietly. Alejandro didn't answer right away. His eyes were still on the screen, on the perfect white shadows against the black void of the X-ray. "I think," he said slowly, "that they won't find him in time, unless I do something." Outside, the lot was quiet again. The deputies were already pulling away, their red tail lights shrinking into the night. Alejandro's own car sat alone at the far end of the lot. He stepped toward it, fishing his keys from his pocket, and then stopped. Something was wrong. The shadows near the dumpster were too deep. The air felt heavier, as if the night itself had gone still. Rosa, locking the clinic door, noticed his hesitation. "What is it?" Alejandro didn't get to answer. A sharp click echoed from the dark. The sound of metal. A gun's hammer being pulled back. From the shadows, a voice slid out, low and cold. "Dr. Ramos, you're coming with us." The police were gone. The boy was in danger. Now Alejandro was too. Who had been waiting for him in the dark? Alejandro froze. The night felt smaller, compressed by the presence in the shadows. A figure stepped forward, tall, lean, dressed in black from collar to boots. The glint of a pistol caught the glow of the lone street lamp. Another shape moved behind him, heavier, slower. This one's face was lit just enough to show a deep, jagged scar running from temple to jaw. "Hands up," the scarred man said, voice gravel-thick. "Turn around." Alejandro lifted his hand slowly. His keys dangled between his fingers, still warm from his pocket. From the clinic doorway, Rosa's voice cracked. "Alejandro!" The man in black turned his gun toward her without hesitation. "Inside. Now." Her eyes locked on Alejandro's for a fraction of a second. Then she disappeared behind the door, the lock clicking shut. The scarred man stepped closer. "We're going for a ride, Doctor. You'll want to cooperate." A third man emerged from the darkness carrying a burlap sack. It smelled faintly of chemicals and old dust. Alejandro swallowed hard. "If this is about the boy, it's about you," the scarred man cut in. And the boy, the one with the gun added. Both. Cold hands gripped Alejandro's arms. The burlap sack slid over his head, the rough fabric scraping his ears. The world went black except for the scent, stale, suffocating. He was shoved forward. His shins hit the car's doorframe. Hands pushed his head down, forcing him into the back seat. The engine started with a low growl. Tires crunched over gravel, then found smooth asphalt. Alejandro tried to keep track of turns. Left, right, long straightaway. But the sack dulled everything. In the dark, the voices came clearer. "You sure he can do it?" the driver asked. "He's the clinic's best," said the scarred man. "Ramos has done border trauma for 20 years. He's patched up cartel gunshot victims without asking names. He'll know what to do." Alejandro's voice was tight. "Know what to do with what?" Silence for a beat. Then, "With the boy." The road grew rough again, gravel popping under the tires. The car slowed, turned, then stopped. Hands yanked him out. The sack stayed on as they pushed him forward. The smell of oil and disinfectant hit him. Wrong for an outdoor space. Metal doors creaked open. Cooler air rushed past. They stepped inside. The sack came off. Alejandro blinked hard, adjusting to the dim light. He stood in a cavernous room, concrete floors, steel beams, harsh fluorescent fixtures hanging low. It was a warehouse, but not for storage. In the center, under the brightest lights, sat an operating table. A child lay on it, small under a thin sheet. Even from a distance, Alejandro recognized the face. Mateo, eyes closed, skin pale, chest rising too fast. Beside him stood a man in a tailored suit, charcoal, crisp, wrong for the setting. His hair was slicked back, his watch gleamed gold. He smiled like they were meeting at a dinner party. "Dr. Ramos," he said, spreading his hands. "I am Don Alvarez." Alejandro didn't speak. He didn't have to. The man read his silence as challenge. "You're here because we have a problem," Alvarez continued. "This boy is valuable, very valuable, but he's also sick. Something inside him broke." Alejandro's eyes flicked to Mateo's stomach under the sheet. The X-ray image burned in his mind. "You'll fix him," Alvarez said, "and then you'll help us. Prepare others." "No," Alejandro said immediately. "I'm not your surgeon." The scarred man stepped closer, his shadow cutting across the floor. "You'll do it," he growled, "or you'll be in his place by morning." Alvarez's smile never wavered. "You're intelligent, doctor. You know what a ruptured pellet will do. You also know that out here, we control who lives long enough to see a hospital." Alejandro's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on Mateo. The boy's breathing hitched, shallow, erratic. "If I operate," Alejandro said, "he goes to a real hospital after. Non-negotiable." Alvarez chuckled softly. "We'll see." In the corner, covered tables held neat rows of black surgical scrubs, vacuum-sealed plastic bundles, and surgical tools gleaming under the light. The air reeked of antiseptic, but not clean, not safe. Behind Alejandro, the scarred man stepped forward. A cold metal muzzle pressed into the base of his neck. "You have 5 seconds to agree," he said. Alejandro glanced once more at Mateo. He didn't have 5 seconds. The boy probably didn't have 1 hour. Would Alejandro betray his oath by working for killers? Or refuse and watch the boy die in front of him? Alejandro didn't move. The muzzle at his neck was cold, unshakable. Mateo's labored breaths filled the space between each heartbeat. Alvarez tilted his head, watching him like a chess player waiting for the other's next move. "Think carefully, doctor. Children are replaceable. But you're useful." Alejandro kept his eyes on the boy. His lips were pale. Sweat dampened his hairline. The rigid swelling in his belly was visible, even under the thin sheet. He knew the truth. The ruptured pellet was already poisoning Mateo's blood. Every passing minute pushed him closer to seizures, respiratory collapse, death. The scarred man, Santiago, Alvarez had called him earlier, shifted the gun slightly, enough to remind Alejandro it was still there. "You operate," Santiago said, "or you take his place." Alejandro's jaw clenched. "You want me to remove the drugs from him," he said slowly. "And then, what? Put more into someone else?" Alvarez's smile widened. "You understand perfectly. We move product in small, clean packages. The market demands consistency, and sometimes we must repackage." Alejandro's stomach turned. "By using children," Alvarez shrugged. "They cross borders more easily. They don't argue. They cost less than professionals. And if one breaks—" He made a small snapping gesture with his fingers. "What the f— We get another." Alejandro's pulse hammered in his ears. The operating light above Mateo buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows over the boy's face. He thought of the oath he'd taken. First, do no harm. But harm had already been done. And refusing to act meant the boy wouldn't see another sunrise. Behind Alvarez, a second table caught his eye. Another child, maybe 8, maybe 10, sat on its edge, swinging his legs nervously. 2 masked men in black scrubs were preparing instruments nearby. Alejandro's voice was tight. "What happens to him?" Alvarez followed his gaze. "That one's next shipment," he said simply. "Our surgeon will pack him, efficiently." The boy looked small, confused. When his eyes met Alejandro's, they widened, pleading without words. Alejandro felt the room closing in. If he agreed, he could save Mateo, maybe stall, maybe find a way out. If he refused, both boys would die. Santiago's voice cut through. 3 seconds, doctor." Alejandro inhaled slowly, steadying himself. His mind ran through scenarios, each ending darker than the last. Then, movement near his wrist. A slight pressure. Esteban. He hadn't even noticed him in the corner before. But now the man stepped close, under the guise of checking Alejandro's restraints. His eyes didn't meet Alejandro's, but his fingers worked fast. In the brief contact, Alejandro felt it. A small, cold piece of metal. A key. "Door 22, Esteban murmured under his breath, so low it barely existed. Then he tightened the straps again, for show. Alvarez didn't notice. Santiago didn't notice. Alejandro's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the spark of something dangerous. Hope. He straightened, masking it with resignation. "I'll operate on the boy," he said finally. "But I'll need proper tools, and no interruptions." Alvarez's smile returned, slow and satisfied. "Good. You'll find we are accommodating when we get what we want." Santiago eased the gun away but stayed close enough that Alejandro could feel the weight of his shadow. The other child on the side table stared at him, wide-eyed. Alejandro forced his face neutral. Inside, he was already planning how to use the operation as cover, how to reach door 22, how to get both boys out alive. Could Alejandro fake obedience long enough to turn Esteban's hidden key into their only chance at escape? Alejandro sat in the dim warehouse room, wrists bound to the chair, ankles cinched tight. The air smelled of antiseptic and blood. Somewhere in the distance, a suction machine hummed. He could hear muffled voices, surgical orders, metal trays clinking. Santiago had left him under the guard of a single man, posted by the door. The guard's pistol hung low on his thigh, finger never far from the trigger. On the far table, Mateo lay pale and still. A fresh IV line dripped into his small arm. His breathing was shallow. The leaking pellet was still inside him, and every second counted. Alejandro's mind raced. If he refused to cooperate, Mateo would die. If he did cooperate, more children would suffer. The door creaked. Esteban slipped inside, carrying a tray of surgical packs. His eyes met Alejandro's, just for a moment. Something flickered there. As he set the tray down, his fingers brushed Alejandro's bound wrists. A cool, thin piece of metal slid into Alejandro's palm. A small key, stamped with the number 22. "Don't talk," Esteban murmured under his breath, pretending to adjust the restraints. His face stayed cold, his voice casual for the guard's benefit. But Alejandro caught the whisper. "Room 22. Wait for noise." Alejandro hid the key in his cuff. He nodded faintly. Over the next hour, he played along. He asked questions about the instruments, about the anesthesia. He leaned over Mateo, checking vitals like a compliant surgeon. He made himself look useful, non-threatening. All the while, he counted doors in his mind. The hallway had 7 on the right, 4 on the left. Room 22 would be near the far end. Somewhere down the corridor, a shout erupted. A crash followed, metal against concrete, then a gunshot. The guard's head turned instinctively toward the sound. Alejandro's hands were already moving. The key slid into the lock on his ankle restraint. One turn, click. The second shackle, click. He stayed perfectly still until the guard bolted toward the noise. When the door shut, Alejandro was on his feet. He crossed the room to the opposite door, eased it open, and slipped into the hall. Dim yellow bulbs lit the narrow passage. Footsteps thundered somewhere in the distance, away from him. He moved quickly, counting doors. 18, 19, 21. There. 22. He reached for the knob. From behind, he heard boots on the concrete getting closer. Too close. Could he get inside before they caught him? Alejandro slipped the key into the lock. His hand was steady. Too steady for what his heart was doing inside his chest. The metal turned with a quiet click. He pushed the door open just enough to slide in. The hinges gave a faint groan. Inside, the air was cooler. No surgical light, no instruments, just shadows. And movement in the far corner. A small figure huddled there, knees drawn to chest, bare feet on the cold concrete. When the boy's face lifted, Alejandro froze. He couldn't have been more than 9. Gaunt cheeks, dark eyes too tired for his age. An IV line dangled from his arm, disconnected, taped clumsily to keep it in place. For a second, the boy didn't speak. Then, in a whisper, "Are you here to pack me too?" Alejandro's throat tightened. "No. I'm here to get you out." The boy blinked, wary. His voice was almost gone. "They said, if I move, they'll hurt my sister." Alejandro knelt. "What's your name?" "Luis." The boots outside drew closer. Multiple pairs now. The sound bounced off the walls. Hard to tell how far. Alejandro scanned the room. No windows. One door. The one he'd come through. No other exit. Except a metal grate near the ceiling. Ventilation shaft. The screws were rusted. One corner already loose. "Luis," Alejandro said, keeping his voice low. "Can you climb?" Luis's eyes followed his finger. He nodded slowly. Alejandro moved to the wall beneath the grate. The room's only chair was light enough to drag. He climbed onto it, bracing his weight, and started working the grate loose with the key. Outside, voices barked orders. One was Santiago's. "Check every room! He's loose!" 2 screws came free. The grate sagged. Alejandro dropped down, pulled Luis to the chair. "Go first. Crawl straight. You'll see a bend. Take it right." Luis hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind." The boy started climbing. Alejandro steadied him until he disappeared into the shaft. The boots were just outside now. A hand rattled the doorknob. It was locked, for the moment. Alejandro shoved the grate fully open and hauled himself up. His shoulders scraped metal. His breath sounded too loud. As his legs cleared the opening, the door crashed inward. Santiago's shout exploded into the room. "There! In the vent!" A gunshot rang out. Sparks jumped from the metal, inches from Alejandro's feet. Could they crawl fast enough before a bullet found the boy? The shaft was narrow, hot, and smelled of rust. Luis crawled ahead, his small frame moving fast, but not fast enough for the echo of boots below. Metal rang as Santiago climbed onto the chair. A second later, his arm reached into the vent, fingers clawing for Alejandro's ankle. Alejandro kicked back, hard. His heel struck bone. A sharp grunt, then a curse. "Move, Luis!" Alejandro hissed. The boy didn't look back. His knees scraped against the steel, bare skin raw. Behind them, Santiago's voice roared into the shaft. "You can't run forever. There's no way out." The shaft curved right, just as Alejandro had told Luis. The bend was tight, forcing Alejandro to twist his shoulders painfully to fit. He felt the reverberation of another gunshot, this one louder, closer. A puff of hot air from behind told him the bullet had ricocheted down the tunnel. Luis whimpered, but kept moving. Alejandro pushed forward, forcing his own breathing to stay quiet. They came to a junction, one shaft going left, the other straight. From the left came a faint, rhythmic thump. Fans, air circulation. The straight path smelled faintly of diesel and cold night air. Alejandro tapped Luis's ankle. "Straight," he whispered. The space grew tighter. Every movement made the metal creak. Below them, shouts echoed. Alvarez's voice now joining Santiago's. "Seal the exits! He's got the product!" Alejandro's stomach twisted at the word product. They weren't talking about drugs. They were talking about Luis. A faint square of light appeared ahead. A grated opening. Through it, Alejandro saw a dark yard lit by a single floodlight. Two trucks idled nearby, exhaust curling into the night. He reached for Luis's foot. "Almost there." But as they neared the opening, movement below caught his eye. Two guards with rifles were stationed right under the grate. One smoked, the other scanned the yard. Luis froze. What now? Alejandro's mind raced. They couldn't drop straight down. It would be suicide. The sound of boots in the shaft behind them was getting louder. His eyes darted to the side of the grate. A narrow maintenance pipe ran parallel to the vent, leading down the wall to a shadowed corner of the yard. If they could pry the grate silently and slide down, maybe. Alejandro pulled the small key from his cuff again. He started working the screws loose, one at a time. Behind them, a hand scraped metal. Santiago's voice was closer than ever. "I see you." Could they drop into the yard without the guards, or Santiago, noticing? The last screw gave way with a faint ting. Alejandro caught the grate before it clattered to the ground. Below, the guards didn't react. The truck engines masked the sound. He slid the grate aside and motioned to Luis. "Feet first. Hold the pipe. Don't let go until you're near the bottom." Luis nodded, his face pale but determined. He eased himself out, gripping the narrow pipe with both hands. Alejandro felt the shaft vibrate. Santiago was almost at the bend. Luis inched downward, boots scraping the wall for balance. When he reached the shadowed corner, he let go, landing softly on both feet. He darted behind a stack of wooden pallets, vanishing from sight. Alejandro followed, swinging his legs out. Halfway down, a metallic screech echoed from the shaft. Santiago, kicking against the bend to force himself through. Alejandro's fingers burned on the rusted pipe as he slid. He hit the ground harder than planned, knees jarring. No time to react. The closer guard turned his head. A cigarette ember flared as he exhaled. His eyes narrowed. Alejandro ducked behind the pallets, just as the guards started walking their way. Luis crouched beside him, breathing fast. Alejandro held a finger to his lips. The guards' boots crunched on gravel. Another few steps and he'd see them. From across the yard, a sharp whistle cut through the air. The other guard shouted something about the front gate. Both men turned, distracted, and jogged away toward the commotion. Alejandro didn't waste the moment. "Go," he whispered. They darted from cover, keeping low, weaving between shadows. The fence was topped with rusted barbed wire. But at the far end, Alejandro spotted a section where the mesh sagged, barely tied. He ripped it loose with his hands, metal biting his palms. Luis crawled through first, then Alejandro. They dropped onto a narrow drainage ditch outside the yard. Behind them, shouts erupted. A flashlight beam swept across the fence. Santiago's voice carried over the noise. "Check the perimeter! They're on foot!" Alejandro pulled Luis up. They ran along the ditch, the sound of trucks revving to life behind them. The desert night was open and dark, but the engines were closing in. Somewhere ahead, Alejandro spotted a faint orange glow. Maybe a roadside fire, maybe a camp. "Almost there," he said, though he didn't know if it was true. Behind, a burst of automatic fire cracked through the air. Gravel sprayed near their feet. Would they reach the glow before the trucks cut them off? The glow ahead flickered, dancing against the low horizon. Luis stumbled on loose gravel, but kept running. Alejandro's hand shot out, steadying him without breaking stride. The ditch sloped upward, forcing them into the open. The desert night air felt sharper here, the silence broken only by the grind of engines behind. A truck's headlights swept over the brush. Too close. Alejandro pulled Luis toward a cluster of mesquite trees. The sand gave way under every step. For each stride forward, they slid half a step back. Luis's breath came in ragged bursts. "Keep going," Alejandro urged, though his own lungs burned. The glow of highway lights seemed close enough to touch, yet stubbornly out of reach. Another shot split the air. A rock to their right exploded into shards. Luis flinched, stumbled. Alejandro yanked him upright and pushed him ahead. Santiago's boots crunched closer, his silhouette a dark shape against the pale slope. The man moved with steady, relentless steps, not rushing, not tiring. Above them, the whine of an approaching semi-truck grew louder. Its headlights swept over the crest, momentarily blinding. Alejandro seized the chance. "Now!" They scrambled the last few meters, hands clawing at the edge. Luis crested first, hauling himself onto the asphalt shoulder. Alejandro followed, but Santiago's hand closed around his ankle. The grip was like steel. Alejandro kicked, but Santiago's fingers dug in deeper. Luis darted forward, waving both arms at the oncoming truck. The semi's horn blared, a deafening blast. Santiago yanked hard, dragging Alejandro halfway back down the slope. Alejandro's palms tore against the grit as he fought to hold on. The truck roared past, and in its turbulence a gust of wind kicked dust and debris into Santiago's eyes. His grip loosened just enough for Alejandro to twist free. He lunged up onto the shoulder, gasping. Santiago was already scrambling after him, fury etched into every line of his face. From the corner of his eye, Alejandro saw Luis pointing down the highway. Headlights, a small car slowing. Maybe they'd seen the struggle. Santiago's voice came low and certain. "You're not leaving with him." Would the car stop in time? Or would Santiago reach them first? The car rolled closer, its headlights cutting long shadows across the asphalt. Luis stood in the middle of the lane, arms outstretched, waving frantically. Tires squealed. The driver swerved, skidding to a stop just meters away. Alejandro turned toward Santiago, who had climbed fully onto the shoulder. Dust streaked his face, his chest heaving. In his right hand, a small black pistol gleamed under the highway lights. Luis froze, eyes locked on the gun. Alejandro stepped between them. "Let the boy go." Santiago's smile was thin, humorless. "You think I came this far to walk away empty-handed?" He raised the pistol slightly. The driver's door of the stopped car creaked open. A woman's voice called out, "Is everything okay?" "Stay in the car!" Alejandro shouted without turning his head. The woman hesitated, then ducked back inside. Santiago took a step forward, boots crunching gravel. "You're not the first to get in my way, doctor, but you can be smart enough to be the last." Alejandro felt Luis's small hand clutch the back of his shirt. Every muscle in his body coiled. He needed a distraction. From down the highway, another horn blared, a delivery truck barreling toward them. The rumble of its engine shook the ground. Alejandro's mind raced. "Last chance, Santiago," he said, voice low. Santiago tilted his head, the gun unwavering. "Then I guess this is it." The truck's headlights engulfed them, blinding. Alejandro dropped low, yanking Luis with him. A single shot cracked, the sound swallowed by the roar of the passing truck. When the dust cleared, Santiago was still standing, but his gun arm hung slack at his side. Blood darkened his sleeve. The woman from the car now stood behind him, holding a heavy tire iron, eyes wide with shock. Santiago was wounded. But was he finished? Or about to strike again? Santiago staggered, one knee dipping toward the ground. The tire iron clattered to the asphalt as the woman stepped back, hands trembling. Luis clung to Alejandro, his breath fast against the doctor's side. But Santiago wasn't done. With a low growl, he straightened, blood dripping from his arm. His eyes locked on Luis, not Alejandro. The pistol rose again, shaky, but still deadly. Alejandro stepped forward, placing himself fully in the line of fire. "Enough," he said. His voice was calm now, too calm. Santiago's lips curled. "You think you can stop me without that truck in the way?" The delivery truck had slowed ahead, brake lights glowing. The driver was climbing out, phone in hand, calling someone. Police, maybe. But they were still too far. Alejandro took a single step closer. "You won't take him, not tonight." For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of cooling engine parts from the stopped car. Then Santiago lunged. Alejandro moved at the same time, grabbing Santiago's gun wrist and twisting hard. Bone popped. The pistol hit the asphalt with a flat, metallic thud. Luis darted forward, kicking the weapon away. It skittered under the delivery truck's tires. Santiago swung his other fist, catching Alejandro across the jaw. Pain flashed white. But Alejandro held his ground. He hooked Santiago's injured arm and drove him backward until the man's boots slipped on the gravel at the slope's edge. One more push, and Santiago tumbled down, sliding halfway before slamming hard into the sand below. He didn't move. Luis's voice was small. "Is he—" Alejandro's hand rested briefly on the boy's shoulder. "We're done here." From the distance, faint sirens began to wail, growing louder. The delivery driver waved them toward the safety of the truck. Alejandro took Luis's hand. They walked toward the red glow of the brake lights, the highway stretching ahead into the dark. Thanks for watching this story. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow we have another special story for you.